Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In our previous lecture, we looked at the nature of literary stylistics, what significance it holds in the study of style as well as language from the perspective of literary criticism, and how stylistics has adopted an approach which would also take into account the importance of certain devices and features which are of importance if the meaning of a text is to be understood. In the discussion about the literary stylistics, we began our lecture with the idea that how Widdowson has emphasized upon the nature of distinction of the literary language or the poetic language from the ordinary language, and that is one of the reasons that literary stylistics emerged as a separate field of the study of literary styles, because it distinguishes the style of language of poetry and literature from the rest of the writings. Widdowson suggests that poetry is unorthodox as far as its language is concerned, that it vibrates with intertextual implications. When we recognize the nature of poetry and literature as distinct and deviant from the normal or everyday use of language, we recognize its unorthodoxy, its strangeness. That is the reason that we are supposed to analyze the style of poetry or the literary language from the perspective of a literary stylistician who wants to emphasize upon the importance of style for the sake of understanding the meaning of the text. Widdowson also suggested that the compact language of poetry is more useful if a literary stylistician is to base his literary understanding of style. Then the style of poetry and the language of poetry provides more broader perspective and canvas for a literary stylistician to convey those observations which he has made about the language, about the style, about the deviant use of the form of the work, depending upon the fact that how it is significant for the purpose that the writer would hide certain common and known features of life, emotions, as well as experiences within those compact symbols, images, and metaphors. So that is why if the language of poetry relies more heavily on certain literary devices, then the job of a literary stylistician is that he should not overlook those devices and must try to find out what these devices reveal in terms of meaning, how they are connected with the rest of the text, and what is their significance and connection or relationship with the overall form of the work. So this is a broader way of understanding the scope of literary stylistics. In our understanding, we looked at those features which literary stylistician takes into account when he approaches a literary text. And from among those features or approaches which a literary stylistician focuses on, we looked at the thematic approach, which is observing the text for the sake of exploring the meaning, for the sake of understanding its message. And mostly in our critical appreciation of the poems and our critical analysis of novels, fiction, and other literary works, we utilize, even as students or learners of literature, the approach that is the thematic approach, because we firstly approach the text. While reading it, we concentrate on what the writer wants to say. Now the part what the writer wants to say is in fact an endeavor or an effort to explore the meanings of the text or to interpret the theme of the text. The literary statisticians associate many ideas and perspectives to the thematic approach because the theme is the message or core of the text. That is why a text which is part of a particular social background which the writer belongs to or which the text has been produced in, this text would reveal either psychological, sociological, ethical, or didactic or religious value of the work. Now the themes might be connected with any of these ideas. Psychological ideas because they might be referring to certain psychological preoccupations of the characters, people, and social groups, For example, it may reveal the psychological state of mind of the characters inhabiting the world in the modern time, which Eliot has observed in his poems, that how modern man reveals himself as devoid of any moral understanding of life and his presence or his being. Then the sociological aspects of the theme may reveal about the society, the humans, that which social conventions are those problems which bind them within these conventions, and the problems which the society is caught in. These might be ills or evils existing or prevalent in the society. These might be certain conventions which the society has rigidly been following and is unable to break. Then there might be some ethical, religious and moral implications also of the text. It might be a battle between good and bad, between good and evil, and it might be a battle between the demonic or the satanic forces and the humanity or the God's messengers, which might be the prophets or the righteous people. So in this way, a text might reveal a number of patterns as far as the theme of the work is concerned. And following the thematic approach, the literary stylistician would focus on what aspects does the text refer to in terms of the psychological preoccupations of people, society and characters, in terms of their sociological problems or issues that they face, and also in terms of their moral, religious and ethical leanings, which are either their actions or even inherent in their thoughts too. Apart from thematic approach, another aspect or feature which is worth consideration for a literary stylistician is that of interpretation of the characters. When analyzing a text from a stylistician orientation who is approaching it from literary perspective, he would also approach it with the help of understanding of the characters. He would focus on the characters in the story, in the novel, or even the persona or the speaker or the characters if they occur in the poems too, to look at what psychological, sociological, metaphysical, ethical concerns and bent of mind, feelings, emotions or issues they seem to represent. So in this way, we interpret characters and find characters as members of a society where they're acting or behaving in a particular way. The characters might reveal a particular code of conduct as far as their behavior and ethical leanings are concerned. Also, they might reveal certain psychological preoccupations according to their personality traits and bent of mind, like we looked at in the last lecture with reference to certain characters like Oedipus Rex, his rashness, his pride, and his irritability or his haste. And then also we can look at such characters like Hamlet himself by Shakespeare. Hamlet is the victim of indecisiveness. His procrastination, a psychological ailment or a psychological idiosyncrasy, does not make him capable of fulfilling the duty or the job as a prince. Similarly, in the same way, you might have read the short story that is the Araby. In that, the protagonist faces the dilemma of finding the world, the real world, quite in contrast or quite illusionary to his dreams. He dreams about purchasing something beautiful and good from a fair, and when he reaches to the city, there his illusions are not really proved to be the reality. When he comes across the idea that the reality is contrary to his dreams, that reveals that he was innocent, and through his epiphany of the understanding of the world, he has gained maturity. So these are various approaches of understanding the characters, how they have gained experience, what ideas, issues, problems their life reveals to the reader, as they might be connected with the time in which they are placed or the context in which they are placed. The third major feature of the literary stylistic approach is the observation and understanding of the elements of narration. Elements of narration are an integral part of anything that is in the form of a narrative. Either it is a novel, a fiction, a short story, or a prose writing, that is narrative prose, or even it can be a play. In the narrative, there are particular features which are to be looked at by the literary stylistician. One such features is the setting. Setting is the descriptions about the place, about the time, about the environment, about the climate, where the scene occurs, where the story takes place. We looked at it with the perspective of Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad's, that how Conrad's story begins in the time when the characters and the narrator are set in a boat that is traveling through the sea. That setting of a boat presents the theme or the idea which reveals that the characters are about to go on a voyage, on a trip. They are disconnected with the world that they know. They would be embarking upon a journey into strange lands, unknown territories and places. So this is the way that the setting, its description, even in the form of colors, climate, time, and the objects present around, would reveal meanings to the reader. For example, looking at the play Waiting for Godot, you can examine that the setting of the play reveals a land that is sort of a God-forsaken land, a wilderness, where there is nothing that could remind us of civilization or of the urban setting. There is only the desert or the wilderness and a single barren tree. The tree is without leaves, and it is as if it has withered out, and the characters who are present under that tree are just the two characters. So the setting reveals that these characters have been thrown out of the world, as if they have abandoned the world that they lived in, and now they are living in a wilderness. Now this setting reveals the existentialist plight, where the world seems to be devoid of meaning, or no change or hope seems to await the characters or the humanity. Those two characters are the symbol of the whole humanity. Now it is the setting that reveals so much about the play Waiting for Godot. So in every story, play or novel, the setting plays a very major role in defining to us that what is it that the reader must expect from the reading. It sets the tone and mood in the story as well, that what sort of gloom would prevail if there are images of darkness, night, shadows. This would signify, this image and the setting would signify to the reader that we expect something either disappointing, something grave, serious in the story. So it is through the setting that the writer paints the picture of a place and scene which has connections with the meanings and the messages of the story, that is the theme of the story. Apart from setting, another element of narration is that of characters. Now in this part, characters are to be looked at from the perspective that how the characters have been sketched, how they have been delineated. For example, throughout the story, does the character seem to undergo changes? Does any growth or development in terms of his understanding of the world and his own personality occur in the story? Now in this category, we label characters either as dynamic characters or as flat characters. We refer to the characters as dynamic if they grow, if they evolve and change in the course of the story or in the development of the story. On the other hand, if the characters remain static, if they do not change, if they do not learn anything, it would denote that they are flat characters. So characters description may be done from the point of view of the author, when the author would comment directly about what a character looks like, what he does in terms of action, behavior and his exhibition also of a particular physiognomy or the physical description and appearance. Then there might be other characters talking about or revealing the traits of the characters that they meet or interact with. For example, look at this idea of characterization or the character's delineation with the help of the example from Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice. In Pride and Prejudice, we see that there are various characters in the beginning or the first part of the novel where they comment upon the protagonist, Fitzwilliam Darcy's personality. For example, the sisters Elizabeth, Jane, and her friend Charlotte are talking about Darcy's personality. And one of them comments that Darcy has been reported to be very friendly and amiable only among his friends and close acquaintances. And with the strangers, he is a bit rude. With strangers, he keeps himself aloof. So this comment is presented by the writer through the mouth of another character. Now, about Darcy's personality, we are told by the Bingley sisters, who have told so to Jane, Elizabeth's sister. So in this way, you see that how a character might reveal himself through his actions. For example, Darcy, through his snubbing of Elizabeth by saying that she is not handsome enough to tempt him, has revealed his personality, which others also label as his pride. So when Darcy himself states about Elizabeth that she is not handsome enough to tempt him, this is the direct characterization, in which the author is presenting his personality directly by his behavior, by his words and his action. In indirect characterization, we get to know how some other characters comment upon another character. For example, the Bingley sister Caroline and Elizabeth's sister Jane's comments about Darcy's personality, that he is perfectly amiable among his acquaintances, and with strangers he would be aloof and quite different. So in those cases, in both these instances, direct characterization is when the character is revealing himself through his actions and his talk. Indirect characterization is when another character comments about that character. So in this way, you can see that characters are revealed in many ways. The author would choose a number of ways to describe to us the characters. Then the characters may reveal themselves through their ideals, through their actions, through their thoughts, through their even appearance, or even through the possessions or the things that they have at their disposal. For example, in the same novel, we see that how the writer has composed the fact that Darcy was quite orderly, quite decent or educated, or represented the very idea of gentleman's life, which is revealed through his house. The Pemberley State, which Elizabeth visits later, is seen to be perfect by Elizabeth. And it is through Elizabeth's eye that we see the Pemberley State, which has got everything in accurate and proper way, that has been managed, maintained for so many years as legacy of the forefathers. So when Darcy's house is seen to be in perfect order, that also reveals the character's personality, that the possessions or the place where the character lives also reveals about him. So these are the things which are describing to us many aspects which the writer has created deliberately for the sake of conveying the meanings of the text. And that over here is done through the characters, which are either dynamic or static, and which are either revealed directly by the character himself or by the other characters indirectly through indirect character narration. Another aspect of the elements of narration is plot. Plot is sometimes considered to be the most complicated parts of the literary composition, because plot is not the story, because plot is the way the story is arranged, the way the events and the sequences of the story are arranged. So it means that the story might be the same, that starts with the beginning, having a middle and an end. But the writer might choose to start the story from its ending and then take you in the reverse order through flashback or the remembrance of the memories in the form of a reverie of a character to take us into the story. So the plot might be revealed in different ways than the story itself. The actual story might be the same, but the plot would be the organization of events. And even there may occur certain digressions in the story, that a writer might divert from the main plot and take us to the subplot. You all may have read the novel by Henry Fielding, his novel Joseph Andrews. There you see that the plot has been narrated in a way where there also occur many digressions or many disturbances which put a stop to the main story, and we move into the story of some other characters apart from the character Joseph Andrews. And Joseph Andrews' life from the beginning till the end is narrated in the order the way things happened. But in some other cases, like I gave you the example in the last lecture also, that of the play in which the major character faces the setbacks in the present time, and due to those setbacks and troubles, he begins to imagine the past that was comforting and soothing. So Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman does not present the story in a linear order or in a chronological order, the order in which the things or the events happened. Rather, the order is distorted or disturbed. We pick the story from the middle, then we reach to its beginning, and then we move to its ending. So the story's connections are made in such a way that the middle comes in the beginning, and the beginning comes to the middle, and then we reach the ending. So this is the plot, which is the arrangement and sequence of the events of the story. So the story may not be there in the chronological order, but that chronology or the sequence might be disturbed as the writer pleases to use it. The next important feature which a literary stylistician takes into account is referred to as the use of imagery and poetic devices. Use of imagery and poetic devices sheds light on the significance of the literary language, on the significance of the poetic language. We have been reminded by critics time and again that the need of literary analysis is enhanced because the poetry or the poetic language makes use of a deviant or unusual, unorthodox language. So when the language is unusual, unorthodox and deviant, it demands attention so that we pick up certain features of the text as we have to focus our attention on those features to understand their meanings and to peel off the layers of the meanings. And a few of these features are labeled as imagery and figurative language. Now, in the elements of narration, the fourth issue or the fourth element is imagery and poetic devices. Imagery refers to the objects and descriptions, images which abound in a literary work and especially poetry, and which are created consciously and sometimes unconsciously by the writer, and it is his artistry which comes at work when he puts certain devices and images or poetic devices and imagery into his work. There are two generally accepted meanings of an image. Image can be taken as the mental representation of things, and then it can be the figure of speech that may express similarity or may draw an analogy. So either images are mental representations, which are objects, things which a writer defines in a poetic work or a literary work, And then the images might be the figurative devices like similes, metaphor, or analogy. So imagery is a very broad term which takes under its umbrella all the words, symbols, images which reveal that they can be imagined, they can be seen through the eye of the mind. Without the images, the writer is unable to paint the true picture of the thoughts that he has imagined. So in this way, we see that imagery plays the same role which colors achieve in a painting. A painter makes use of a particular color to convey the sense of the thing imagined or the thing seen, whereas the writer would make use of the images so that he conveys the accurate feeling or thought to the reader, and the reader should be able to reach to the same ideas which the writer has felt at the time of its composition. We will look at the notion of imagery in great detail with the help of examples also. We will observe what imagery is, how is it different from the figurative language, or what are the connections of imagery and figurative language. Also, in order to understand the importance of imagery and the idea of how imagery enhances the impact and the meaning of the poetic creations, we will also have a understanding of the poem, so that understanding of one poem and analysis of a single poem would be effective in revealing to us the importance of imagery and figurative language in the study of literary stylistics. Imagery is defined as the use of objects in the form of concrete objects or abstract objects, or even actions and feelings that a writer or a poet wishes to convey through a poem. And it also encompasses the use of similes and metaphors. So imagery is anything ranging from concrete objects like trees, plants, stones, shells, pebbles, colors. These are all images. And it might also convey the feeling too, or even an action, and it may even include the figurative devices like similes, metaphors, personification, and so forth. So imagery is a very broader field where you would find certain objects which are either concrete or abstract, which convey feeling or action, or which convey the description or the scene or the picture of a place or a thing. Images might also become objects which the writer has used in order to intensify the meaning of the poem with the help of maybe comparative devices like metaphor and personification, and certain other devices too, which may be either euphemism or hyperbole. So anything that ranges from an object to feeling and to the comparative or figurative devices comes under the umbrella of the broader term imagery. And figurative language too becomes the part of the imagery employed by a writer in a literary text. Observe this example that is taken from a poem by Sidney. It is, "With how sad steps, O moon, thou climbest the sky, how silently and with how vain a face." Now, in this example, we see that the poet is describing moon as if moon is a human being, that the moon is climbing sadly towards the sky, and it is silent and sad. The silent expression and sadness of the moon and its face reveals its disappointment, its melancholy. Now, this is the imagery which is presenting moon as a personification of a human being. Moon cannot climb like a human being can climb stairs. Moon cannot be silent or sad like a human being because it has not been endowed with speech or expressions. But the round shape of the moon is assumed or seen by the poet as the face of a person who is dejected, who is sad, who is lonely, who is quiet after something that he might have encountered. And it is retreating slowly. It is moving towards the sky slowly. The slow movement also reveals a sort of defeat, failure, disappointment, dejection, and withdrawal too. So it's the use of imagery, the image of moon climbing like a lost or a failed man who has suffered some disappointment or grief, and how the moon is referred to as having a very sad face and a sad expression, reveals the fact that the writer wants to intensify the idea of grief, that the persona is viewing moon as sad, whereas it might be the persona or the speaker in the poem himself who might be grieved, sad, dejected, or disappointed. So look at the fact that the idea of sadness, gloom, melancholy is not new to the reader, because this has been the theme of many of the poems that we have read. Loneliness, sadness, grief, failure, melancholy, these themes are time and again repeated in poems and many other works too. But what makes us appreciate Sidney's description of loneliness, dejection, sadness, grief, failure in this example is the way it has been presented. And the way it has been presented relies on images. The image of the moon climbing like a human being, and the image of the moon having sad, silent expression on the face. So this is the importance of imagery. How attractive it makes something look, whether that thing is known or unknown, whether this thing is appealing or unappealing. It would depend only on the imagery and the figurative devices that the poet would employ, that they would enhance the beauty of the work, and they would even enable the reader to focus on the reading. It would enable the reader to appreciate the work as well. So the example shows personification of the moon, which is imagery and a figurative device. And he also shows through this that moon too is capable of suffering like a human being. And the sense of unhappiness associated through various human attributes of walking dejectedly and having a serious and sorrowful expression on face and being in a dejected mood also add to the images which build up in our mind that it might be the poet or the speaker who has associated his dejection with the moon. When he looks at the moon, because he is not in a happy mood, the moon appears to him as sad, gloomy, and melancholic. So this is how imagery works. That makes us appreciate that we have encountered these themes before, but never before these themes have been expressed in this poetic or unorthodox a manner, where life has been endowed to the thing which is abstract, like a moon. It is possible to list some of the areas of experience from which the poet frequently draw the images or the objects which they incorporate in the poems for the sake of enhancing its stylistic appeal. Objects in the poem can be associated with anything that might be either religious or cosmic. They are associated in nature with things such as flowers or even animals or weather. So these are the examples of the broad range of imagery. Imagery can encompass anything that might be revealed to be belonging to a particular category in the nature or the world. For example, a writer may employ cosmic imagery. For example, in the previous line that we discussed, that moon is seen to be climbing towards the sky. Now the words like moon, sky, cloud, these all images, or even if reference is there to sun or the wind or the galaxies or the heavens, it would mean that this is the use of cosmic imagery, because here all the images used by the poem belong to a particular field, that is cosmology. So Similarly, if the writer makes use of imagery in a poem or in a fiction or novel that talks about the idea of seamanship, navigation, travels to the shores, making use of words like boat or the shore, angling or navigation, these all images reveal that he is using the nautical imagery related to the ships and the traveling into the sea. Writer may also make use of imagery which may be referred to as disease imagery if he makes use of certain words which refer to ailments and diseases or sickness. For example, being pale, being feverish or trembling, or even in a state of maybe some fear due to illness. All images reveal that the writer is emphasizing upon the disease imagery. For example, take the line from Hamlet by Shakespeare, where Hamlet comments that something is out of joint. Now, the idea of something is out of joint refers to the fact that the character is speaking as if the country is being plagued or is suffering with some disease. Now, that idea that something is rotten in the state of Denmark is the comment made earlier by Hamlet. So when Hamlet states that something is rotten in the state of Denmark and something is out of joint, now something is rotten and out of joint makes us aware of the same image of disease, that something has gone wrong. It is a sickness that prevails, it is a malaise, it's an ailment that the country is facing. So in a broader metaphorical sense, the writer wants to refer to the incest or the illegal marriage of the uncle of Hamlet to Hamlet's mother after the murder of the killing of the king as something that would bring about death, disease or burden on the country, the country of Denmark. So the disease imagery is revealed through the idea of sickness, that is showing the state of the country as rotten and as disjointed. There are other areas also which imagery might take into account. For example, the description of vegetation, grass, leaves, flowers, or even mentioning the names of the flowers like pansies or sunflowers. They might all reveal that the writer is choosing a specific category of flowers, vegetation, and this is the imagery from nature. So when we encounter certain poems in which there are images either towards the meadows, towards the hedges, groves, or fruits or orchards, we say that the writer has employed nature imagery. Similarly, there might be images of animals or insects, or even images about the condition of the weather like drizzling or icy cold. These words connote that a particular field is from where the writer has chosen the images. So this is how broad the concept of imagery is. It might encompass cosmic, religious metaphors and images or objects. It might include animal imagery, nature imagery, or the imagery of cosmology or nautical imagery. Then there might be images which are connected to the senses. For example, if particular words are used which reveal the sense of sight, which you can see and observe in the forms of colors or various objects. And there can also be images which belong to another sensation, that is a smell. If the writer has used the words like the aroma or the smell or the fragrance of certain either flowers or food, you feel that the images employed by the writer evoke your sense of smell. Then there might be images related to the other senses like tactile imagery related to the sense of touch. Then imagery related to hearing, imagery related to the sight as well. So sight, smell, hearing, touch, and even imagery related to the sense of movement, where things might be revealed as maybe moving on a pace. Either the sound of the train approaching reveals to the idea of movement of the wheel, or even the idea of sunset setting down would reveal the movement of time. So there are plenty of ways that the writer can draw the images, and the plenty of areas also from where the writer or a poet can draw images. It would enhance the feeling of reality. It would lend an air of reality and concreteness to the work, which appears in the form of imagination or thoughts of the poet. But when the writer makes use of images of certain fields of the life, either from the nature, from cosmology, from the nautical field, or even from weather and even the species of animals and insects, he is making the work seem authentic and real, and there might be meanings associated with certain images. For example, making use of cosmic imagery, the writer might try to convey a sense of freedom that the sky's limitless expanse presents to us. If the writer is drawing imagery from certain ailment, sickness, or diseases, he is trying to convey a sense of something gone awry or something gone wrong in the world, or even in the morality or the mind of the people or the characters. So imagery also broadens the scope of the theme or the scope of the meaning of the work. Look at these examples. For example, if a writer says that bad weather is connoted through the use of maybe thunder, dark clouds, and also the mud which is now being witnessed in the streets, and the pounds of water that have collected now into the fields and open areas. If such an image is presented in a poem or a story, then we know that it is associated with something that is a kind of foreshadowing or a foreboding, an ominous indication that something wrong or something bad is about to happen. Take, for example, the novel Tess of D'Urberville by Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy's Tess of D'Urberville makes use of the images he relies on the idea that nature is harsh and cruel. The trees at night, when Tess was traveling to go to sell the beehives, began to look like ghosts. The images of trees begin to look like ghosts and shadows, as if they are following the girl, as if they are following the protagonist, Tess. And also at the time when Tess was traveling to sell the beehives, there occurs rain. Rain, thunder, storm, and such bad weather connotes that some accident, some mishap is about to happen. And that does happen. That after that, Tess is into the clutches of a very brutal and cruel man, Alec. Now, this idea that Tess's life would turn towards a tragic part is revealed by Hardy through the use of weather imagery, and the weather is very foul and dangerous, which reveals that now danger and very much gloom would prevail in Tess's life. So imagery is enhancing the mood, the feeling, as well as the meaning of the text. It is not a spectacle or a scene only. The writers do not employ imagery only to beautify the text externally or to attract the reader through its heightened use of images and language. But imagery has something to do with the message or the theme, which is the major part of the writer to present to the reader. Similarly, the images of darkness would connote something negative is about to happen, and the image of light would denote positivity. Imagine that we read certain texts in which we are given an idea, for example, in Paradise Lost. whenever Satan appears or his long speeches are described, he is accompanied by the images of fog, mist, a hazy environment. Then the haze, fog, smoke connotes something sinister and evil. Now the idea of evil and darkness is associated with the images of fog and also with the ideas of haziness and smoke too. Writers may also employ religious imagery, cosmic imagery, nautical imagery, and images can be drawn from any field of daily life about machines and gadgets, or about business, or even about the instruments or images of war. So, sickness, disease, death, there are many fields in life, in the world, that a writer can draw images from. So a few examples are of nautical, religious and natural or nature imagery, and specific examples could be the use of machines and gadgets which belong to a particular field that the writer wants to convey the sense of reality about it, and there might be images about war, ammunition, and this would reveal that the writer is concerned with conveying the accurate sense of the experience that the character has undergone or the writer himself has felt or observed. Now when we understand the notion of imagery, we must make a distinction between imagery and analogy. Imagery is any broader object from daily life or nature or a setting in the world, whereas analogy is a comparison. Look at these two examples I have chosen for you for the sake of explaining the difference between imagery and analogy. Imagery we have looked at in detail with the help of any field, a broader field from which the writer draws the material or the raw material, that is the words and objects. Analogy is a comparison. For example, observe this example that is taken from Francis Bacon's essay Of Truth. In Of Truth, Bacon makes use of an analogy or a comparison. This analogy is between falsehood or lie and mixing of alloy in gold. He says that mixing of falsehood in truth is like mixing of alloy in gold. So just the way to make any instrument or any ornament that is made up of gold, if you want to make it strong, you add into it a little bit of alloy so that it doesn't break. So a pure gold item would not be that durable. If a certain ratio of alloy is used in pure gold, it would add to its durability. It would add to its strength. So when gold is made strengthened with the help of the mixing of alloy, similarly, we try to make our words, our ideas, our thoughts more effective with the help of certain lies. So if we mix lie in our talk, we want to enhance the impact of our talk, or we want to enhance the impression of our talk. So to gain some significance and importance, we also rely on falsehood. This is what Bacon wants to say, that mixing of falsehood in truth would be useful or has become quite useful in the world by the practice of people, because they want to make an impact upon the people through the use of such exaggeration, which is mixing of falsehood into truth, and it is just like the mixing of alloy into gold. Just the way a man would mix alloy to make gold strengthened so that it doesn't break, so that it stays durable, we in everyday life mix falsehood in our talk so that we are heard, we are given importance, so that we sound good to people. So this is analogy. Another example of analogy is also taken from the same writer, Bacon's essay. He, in his essay Of Ambition, uses the analogy of a sealed dove for an ambitious man. Now in this comparison he states that an ambitious man is like a sealed dove. Just the way a sealed dove is blindfolded it cannot see. And this sealed dove is used by the hunters when they want that the dove should not see that an enemy is attacking it in the form of a falcon. They use a blindfolded or sealed dove because it will be utilized to catch the falcon. Because if it sees the falcon, it would hide, it would disappear, it would run away. So in the same way, an ambitious man is blindfolded because he must be used by the prince or the emperor. So the analogy between a blindfolded dove and a blindfolded man who is blind because of ambition draws a comparison between the two dissimilar things. A dove that is blindfolded and a man who is ambitious is also blindfolded. Now these are the two examples of analogy in which we see a comparison. That is in the analogy, something striking or unexpected is seen to be common in two extremely different things. For example, there is difference between the two fields. One is the rhetoric, the talk, that is mixing of falsehood in truth, and the other field is that of mineralogy, where mixing of alloy in gold is done. Now, how the writer has brought two distinct and separate fields through his comparison to make the reader understand the importance of lie in human beings' life, the mixing and the use of lie for the sake of sounding attractive towards the audience and gaining approval and applause from people. Similarly, the second analogy also reveals that the writer wants to tell us that ambitious people are blind like the sealed dove. They might be used by other people because they are quite bent upon finding or achieving their ambition. Now, the next example states the difference of imagery from analogy. Imagery means the use of images or objects for the sake of conveying the sense of reality in the poem or in the literary work. Look at this example that is from P.B. Shelley's poem that says, "I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed." Here the poet is giving us the image of a man who has got tangled and hurt by falling upon the thorns, and he is bleeding. Now the image of a man caught in the bushes or in the thorns, who has got tangled, who doesn't find any escape out of that thing which is hurting him, and he's bleeding, enhances the idea how agitated and how frustrated the speaker is, who has been facing certain difficulties in life. The nature of difficulties would be revealed on the reading of the poem, but this image of a man tangled in the thorns and due to the thorns he is bleeding is very strong and forceful in conveying the sense of injury, hurt and pain. Now the hurt and pain is not faced at the physical level the way the imagery conveys, but the imagery tries to convey the feeling of the poet that the poet is in as much pain, or the persona is in as much pain or agony as much would be a man who has got tangled and hurt and is bleeding due to the thorns that are piercing into his body. So this is the use of imagery, that it conveys the sense of accuracy or the more closeness to the same thought which the poet has undergone when he has composed some poem or writing, keeping in mind that which particular sensation to convey to the reader. So this is how imagery works, and it is the role that imagery plays in the poetic language or in the literary language. Imagery and poetic devices are also significant for the analysis when we are to look at any poem or literary writing from the perspective of a literary stylistician, because literary stylistician is picking up certain stylistic devices as the prominent features of a text. When he picks up the prominent features of a text in the form of literary devices, he pays close attention to the poetic devices too. Closely connected with the expressiveness is the element of choice. That means that the writer would pick and choose. For instance, in the previous example, the writer chose the idea of getting tangled in the thorny bushes. He did not mention the idea of being cut into pieces through a knife or pain being inflicted on the body by some opponent or enemy. That would have given another image of the poem or the thought, because getting himself tangled means that there is certain failing on part of the persona, that he has gotten tangled in the wilderness, in the bushes, and in the thorns. Had he mentioned that he feels that he is bleeding because of receiving cuts or receiving hurts from an enemy, it would have posed the responsibility of his pain on some external force or enemy. Now that the poet is trying to convey the sense that the fault lies within him, the fault is his own. That is why getting tangled in the thorny bushes and bleeding due to the hurt and the pain is more pertinent, as it conveys the idea that the persona is taking the responsibility of his own decay, of his own doom, and of his own problems. So this is the choice that the poet has made, that he did not choose one image over the other, because he found one to be more pertinent and useful. So there are synonyms which can be used. Even there can be inverted use of syntax, word order in the poems, which would be disrupting the normal order and the normal use of sentence structure. And the inversions also are used for the sake of putting emphasis, either delaying the expression or the feeling to which the reader is supposed to reach to, or they may also create pathos or a feeling of finality, irony, or even parody. So even the use of a particular sentence structure, word order, within the use of the images and words may convey many aspects which the writer wants to convey quite deliberately, or even quite slowly to the reader, because the idea of literary writing is to prolong the sensation of pleasure that is received through reading. So when the sensation of pleasure is prolonged, that the reader has to force himself to understand the connotations of words, images, and symbols, that makes the writer's goal to come to closer to its achievement, because the purpose was not just to communicate an idea. The purpose was to communicate an idea artistically. So when an idea is communicated artistically, the reader also takes time. He also takes pains to understand it. Apart from imagery and figurative devices, the writer also relies on certain devices which we refer to as evocative devices. Evocative devices are which reveal the emotions of the characters, or which reveal the emotions of the writer. And then these evocative devices help ignite the same emotion, same feeling, and same feeling maybe of regret, anger, or frustration, for example, in the reader. So evocative devices have a double role to play. Firstly, these evocative devices reveal the writer's bent stance, or his being affected by certain things that he have noticed in the society or life. And then when these evocative devices are read or encountered by the reader also begins to feel in the same way the writer has felt. The examples can be that evocative devices might be the devices of satire, irony, or they can be the devices which make a parody or burlesque in the form of comedy. So all these devices make the reader feel either disgust or condemn something. Take the example of Joseph Andrews by Henry Fielding, where the writer has made use of irony, satire, burlesque, slapstick, and such devices which make us understand the absurdity of the actions of the characters, who are fake and pretentious. So in order to reveal the pretension, the hypocrisy, and the fake attitudes of the society, of the upper class, of the English society, he reveals it through irony, satire, even burlesque and slapstick, where they seem to be indulging in situational comedy which is grotesque or even reaches to the level of burlesque. Evocative devices are also related to a particular form and even time. For instance, mostly prose writers make use of evocative devices like satire, parody, irony, humor, comedies, or burlesque. We will look at these notions in detail too as we will proceed with our study of the course of stylistics, because some of these terms might be new to you people, like what is burlesque or what is parody, what is slapstick. Now I'm just giving you the names of these devices to let you know that these devices are evocative devices because a writer presents a stance through these. What these devices mean would come in this same study, in the same course, but a little later, when we will be aware of the scope and dimensions of the subject of stylistics. So here only the reference is made for the sake of making you understand that evocative devices are those devices which try to make the reader associate with the text emotionally. Either we laugh, we cry, we get angry, or we get frustrated because the writer has made use of these evocative devices like satire, irony, burlesque, or slapstick. So it affects the reader because the writer has employed it to present a particular effect to the reader, that is either repulsion or through the use of irony, it might be the idea of absurdity, hypocrisy existing in the society or the situation or the characters. It can be associated with the milieu or the time or the social setting. For example, we see that 18th century or the classical age was referred to as the age of reason or age of satire. The writers like Jonathan Swift, belonging to the 18th century, and Alexander Pope are labeled as the satirist. And then the age, 18th century too, is called the age of satire. Why? Because the writers of that time were more concerned about reforming the society, about improving the society, and they do so through their indictment of the society by pointing out to the ills. And in their work, like prose writings mostly, they focus on the devices like satire and irony, humor and comedy, so that the people know the situation as how absurd it is because of their hypocrisy. So this is how style is enhancing the meaning, and how style is connected with an age or time. When we say that evocative devices are associated with particular milieu or particular time, it means that in a particular time there might be fashion or vogue in the literary circles to convey an idea with the help of something specific. For example, if we look at the Anglo-Saxon age or the earlier age of the development of literature as the age of epics or allegory, the 18th century is the age of satire. So in this way, every time, every period in history shows the preoccupation of the writer with some specific devices or modes of writing literature. When they are making use of a particular style, it also denotes that in that age, that style was more in vogue or in fashion. Then the style may also be associated with register. For example, the register in poetry would allow the writers to convey an idea in a more formal manner. But the register in, you can say, the poetry, for example, the elegy, would allow a writer to convey the feeling of sadness. But if a writer parodies it, this would be a parody which would make use of irony or satire. So the mode of parody would allow a writer to shift his angle from sympathy or from sadness or grief to parodying some genre or some form of poetry. So evocative devices are those devices which reveal emotions and also which make the writer reveal an emotion so that the reader begins to feel in the same way. If a reader's sympathy is to be enhanced about an idea, the writer would make use of evocative devices. When the readers encounter these texts, they begin to feel the same way the writers have felt, because the heightened emotional state or the intensity of an emotion which the writer has felt is conveyed through the words, and when the reader would interact with the text and would analyze those words, images, symbols or evocative devices, he would feel in the same way. So it is possible through the figurative language or imagery that the writer is able to convey the sensation that he has felt to the reader also. So we read the poem and we are able to understand the abstract truth behind the concrete pictures the poet has given. For example, the abstract truth behind the concrete picture of a man falling on the thorns and bleeding gives the image of the guilt, the suffering and the pain that might be moral plague rather than the physical pain or suffering. Now let us take the example of a poem and analyze it from the perspective of the idea of imagery that we have discussed today. In our discussion today, we have looked at the fact that imagery might range to multiple fields. It might be about the description of the concrete objects. It might belong to a field or a particular kind. And it can also make use of figurative language like metaphors, similes, analogies. This poem is by John Keats and a very famous ode by Keats called Ode to a Nightingale. In Ode to a Nightingale, the poet, who is a romantic poet, makes use of imagery in abundance. Observe these lines that my heart aches and drowsy numbness pains my senses as though of hemlock I have drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed and lethe words I sank. Then the first stanza, if it is observed closely, gives a sense of taste. Now the taste imagery dominates in this stanza. We see that the imagery evoked by the writer is that of drinking something that is intoxicating him, that is turning him into drowsy, that is taking him into a state of forgetfulness or oblivion. Now the state of forgetfulness and oblivion can be attained only on drinking something that is intoxicating. Either it is some opium or something like wine or maybe some substance. Now this is not literally that the poet has taken, but the memory, the remembrance or the hearing of the nightingale's song acts on his mind as if it is something like an intoxication. So the image that the writer presents is that of drinking something that is intoxicating, but the image of drinking something intoxicating is associated with the association of the poet with the song of the bird. The bird's song is so magical, the bird's song is so beautiful that it has made him drowsy, it has made him forgetful, oblivious of the environment, pains, problems and setting. Just the way anything that is intoxicating in the form of a drink or a wine would make your senses go blurred. So look at this. This is the power of imagery, that the image of getting drunk through some intoxication is associated with the idea of hearing a nightingale's song and then forgetting the world around, even the pains and frets of the world, and sinking into oblivion or daydreaming or living in a state of heavenly bliss because of the mesmerizing, enchanting sound of the song of the bird. So that is the power of imagery that brings something to the forefront, that how important the idea of the sound of the bird is for the poet, that he associates it with an image of something that is tasted, something that is enjoyed in the form of a drink. But he's not drinking something, he is listening to the song of the nightingale. So the song of the nightingale feels to be an intoxication. Then if we proceed further in the poem, we will come across certain other images, like it's not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thy happiness, that thou light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beechen green, and shadows numberless, sing'st of summer in full-throated ease. Now he continues in his praise and in his comparison of the state of enjoyment and peace that the bird, the nightingale, is in, and the state in which he is. He says that the bird is singing the song of joy and happiness, and he is getting envious of the happiness of the bird. He says that the bird is light-winged dryad. Now, the phrase light-winged dryad is to be termed as a metaphor or a comparison, because the nightingale is a bird that is a temporal or a very insignificant object in nature, but light-winged dryad is an image from Greek mythology that is of something like a goddess or a mythical being that lives in the trees. A mythical being or a goddess is something that is ephemeral or that is out of this world. It's like a fairy, or it's like an angel, or something extraterrestrial. It is not prone to death. It is not prone to the shortness of life or even to griefs. But the bird, because of its melodious voice and its ability to fly away to unknown lands, is compared to a goddess, light-winged dryad. Now the image of light-winged dryad reveals that the bird can go anywhere. It can even be transported or transferred to the realms of heaven, where the human being cannot reach while being alive. So the bird's ability to escape the world is conveyed through the image of a light-winged dryad. That is the metaphor. Similarly, the idea of melodious plot. Look how two images are joined here. This is the use of imagery, very tactful use of imagery by Keats, that he combines two images. Plot is land, surface, or it is the earth, and melody is the song. How the sense of music or hearing through the word melody is associated with place. That the earth or the place is overflowing with the voice and the beauty and of the music. That is why the plot or the place has become melodious, where the beautiful nightingale is singing. So the melodious voice of the beautiful nightingale is transferred to the place, which resonates, which echoes with the beautiful song of the nightingale. That is why he uses the image of plot or place with the song, that the song is resonating or vibrating in the place, and it has made the place melodious. Literally, the bird is melodious, its singing is melodious, its voice is melodious. But how it is transferred to the place, that the place has become melodious because it resonates and echoes with the song of the nightingale. Then further, the imagery is employed to enhance the impact of beauty, abundance, joy, and heavenly state of the scene, that is reference to a place that is beechen green. Now this is an employment of imagery which makes us see that the idea of abundance of greenery and beauty of nature is conveyed by making a kind of invention or innovation in the use of word that is associated with the word beach. The green color of the place is made to be associated with the open fields on the beaches, which makes it sound like you can say innovation into the word creation, that is beach and green. And the shadows numberless, which is referring to the idea of the darkness that increases due to the density and the depth of the forest or the green trees. So the words beach and green and shadows numberless, similarly the word melodious plot and the light-winged dryad, all are the images employed by the writer for the sake of conveying those meanings which might not have been possible for the author to convey had we utilized only the ordinary language. So this is how the poetic language for a stylistician would be quite deep, and it would be comprehensive as far as the understanding of the meanings of the poems are concerned. And in the literary stylistics, we observe that how the writers have made use of figurative language and imagery for conveying the meanings, and how these meanings enhance the style and make the poetic language sound different and enhance the meaning of the poetic language as compared to the language of the ordinary expression, either in the speech or even in the writing. So our understanding today of the poem on which we employed our understanding, and we applied the understanding of the concepts and features learned in the literary stylistics like imagery, figurative language, and even evocative language to understand that how can they be picked up, how can be identified in a text, and how can they be added with the understanding of the meaning which we are supposed to reach to, as our job as a literary stylistician or the learner of the subject of stylistics is to know the texts better, to know the language of the poetry and literature better. So that is all for today's lecture, in which we analyzed the literary stylistics and its features, with our focus on the application of those features in the reading of a poem by Keats. Thank you.